This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging markets continue to be held back by the ongoing US-China trade tensions. MSCI's emerging market stocks index fell 0.8% on the day, with tech stocks dropping about 1%. Now, on the continent, good news for Egypt. We saw its market continuing to climb, and that's after a move to liberalize the custom dollar price boosted sentiment. The market has already gained about $3.3 billion in August, with all indices climbing. Now, the EGX 30 benchmark index soaring 10.77% in the period. Now, also coming up on the show today, we'll be looking at the exploration of oil and gas across the African continent. The UK government loses its working majority as the debate to avoid crashing out of the EU continues. And Egypt launches its first online platform to train its future female drivers. Now, the exploration and production of oil and gas continues to be vigorously pursued by many African states and international corporations. Over the last decade, a string of successful exploration projects have seen the continent's oil and gas reserves rise to nearly 28. However, with unpredictable fluctuations in oil prices, it becomes more difficult for these African states to exploit their resources in ways that benefit them. The question now for Africa is whether embracing oil and gas is socially responsible. This is as the world transitions into a post-carbon globe, as renewable energy becomes more cost-effective. Well, let's break this all down with NJ Ayuk, the Executive Chairman of the African Energy Chamber. Very glad to have you on the show with us today, sir. Now, your book, which is called Billions at Play, it delves into the potential of the energy sector and the potential that the energy sector holds in revitalizing African economies. Now, it does come at a time when many oil-producing nations have been talking about diversifying their economies away from oil and gas. How do you address this particular issue or this shift in your book?
Thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here in Johannesburg. We're dealing with some unpredictable circumstances with xenophobia. My heart goes out to a lot of people that have been hurt by this. Racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, they're wrong, and we all should condemn it. Now, to your question with regards to how oil and gas is going to compete with what we're seeing today, I think we are in a very, very great period in Africa. We've had tremendous experience with oil and gas production and exploration, but you also have to look at where Africa is going with regards to diversification, diversifying the energy mix. And let's take, for example, in East Africa, Kenya was the only producer. South Sudan was the only producer. Now you have Kenya as part of this. So I think you're going to see a lot happening with oil and gas exploration, but also don't walk away from your day job. Keep the energy mix. Look at renewables. Transform and transition from fossil fuels as we know it every day.
Quite right. And as you mentioned, over the last decade, we've seen the number of African countries with proven oil and gas reserves. They've risen significantly, I think, to about 28 countries now on the continent. How, in your opinion, do they get it right, especially in terms of identifying the right opportunities going forward?
You have to look at making oil benefits its people. The true question we have to ask is that everyday Africans have not been happy with how the oil industry has really worked with them. I've been so fortunate to be part of this industry, done some really good deals, performed really well, and I've been blessed to have made a lot of money with the oil industry. But we have to take a deep look at ourselves and look at whether as a state or as companies. What we have to really do going forward and looking at how this industry really works and how the oil industry can really do its best to improve the continent, we have to start engaging with diversifying. We have to look at people. But we also have to challenge ourselves on how we operate. That's why when you look at it and you say exploration, we African companies are not really involved in a lot of the exploration and the high risk exploration because of things like capital, because of other lack of technology know-how. But at a time when it is increasing, 28 countries are producing oil, whether it is small scale or large scale. 7 African countries are already members of OPEC. New discoveries happening around the continent. Senegal is going to have a lot of gas, and they're going to build some LNG trains. Mozambique, the same thing, $50 billion being spent in Mozambique. It's time for a paradigm shift, and it's time for us to take a big look on how this industry affects everybody and how we really move forward to make sure that oil does benefit every African, and we're proud of our resources, and we can use these resources to improve our lives and everyday people in this continent.
Well, certainly the sector is once again attracting more investment, especially from exploration companies and refiners. And that's, of course, following the prolonged break we saw, which was sparked by a slump in oil prices. So given this, how do you suggest leaders make sure that they're on a sustainable and a profitable path moving forward?
We have to create an enabling environment. The oil explorers, whether they're coming from China or the United States or Europe, they are going to be the future job creators, working together with African companies to do that. So you create an environment where they can explore. It's time to look at how we deal with our fiscal terms. It's time to look at how we deal with issues regarding local content. It's time we really look at how we attract more companies to explore, but explore responsibly. But when you also look at this, and governments have to pay attention to this, we have to also look at how we treat Africa's youth and also Africa's women. There is no reason why at this stage in Africa's oil and gas exploration, oil and gas development, we are having women under 10% in management or anything. We got to move women from back rooms to boardrooms. Women can no longer be the last hired and the first fired. We have to change that. And this is a great opportunity to Africa, because when oil prices collapsed in 2014, we didn't have anything to bet on. Now exploration is picking up. There's going to be more production. There's going to be more refining. It's time for the states to work with companies to say, let's lift people up. Let's really move it, but also be careful. Don't go out there and go what I call and say and go nationalist on oil companies. You can't love jobs and hate those who create jobs. Let's create opportunities to make sure that this industry works for itself, and we use these opportunities to do what we've not really done very well in Africa in the past, to diversify our economies, make sure that we have lights. I'll give an example. You look at Nigeria, for example. You have so much gas being flared, the country doesn't have power. This is time to capture that gas that's being flared, and you really power the country.
Well, you were actually just in Beijing, where you secured more than $1.4 billion in intentions to invest in Africa's bankable projects, especially in the energy sector. Give us a sense of what potential you see for China and Africa in the energy sector moving forward.
China is going to be strong in Africa. China is in Africa to stay. There's a lot of opportunities to be done. There are a lot of opportunities between Africa and China, a lot of bankable projects. You're going to see a lot of investment in refining. You're going to see a lot of investment in developing fields that are already there, gas fields that are being stranded. China has done something really amazing with building technology, and that is really going to help in how we do our job.
Well, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us today, sir. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there. Of course, that was Mr. N.J. Ayuk. He's Executive Chairman at Africa's Energy Chamber, and he's joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's move on now and stay with mining matters. Zambia has been urged to keep mineral royalties capped at about 7.5% in the 2020 budget to safeguard the health of its mining sector and to promote additional investment. Now, the country's mining body has submitted those proposals to the Finance Ministry, arguing that the 2019 mining tax regime had raised the tax burden on mines to unsustainable and uncompetitive levels. Well, Africa's #2 copper producer increased its sliding scale for royalties of 4 to 6% by 1.5 percentage point. It also introduced a new 10% tax when the price of copper exceeds $7,500 per ton. Now, the scale is adjusted so that royalties are paid at higher levels as commodity prices climb and are reduced as prices fall. Meanwhile, South Africa's commercial capital was under siege again on Tuesday as we saw violence erupted overnight in 3 suburbs. It's being called a criminal activity as well as xenophobia. At least 4 people have been killed so far and several others have been seriously wounded in riots that broke out on Sunday. Well, hundreds of shops have also been looted and vandalized. And CGTN's Angelo Coppola was there and brings us this details.
President Ramaphosa has broken his silence on the xenophobic attacks, condemning it in the strongest possible terms and explaining that he's called a security clusters meeting on Tuesday. But the mood on the streets is far from calm.
The government will not do anything. They will just say we condemn, we condemn. Condemn what? Because it's not xenophobia. Enough is enough. Let government rebuild all those buildings.
Foreign nationals living in South Africa are also at their wits' end, most saying that they are here because of serious issues in their home countries.
We never steal any women from them. We are here because of our job, because what we are looking for here, just because of our own family, you understand? So us, you came here, because me, I come from the Burundi. What I'm saying, because people, they're taking a lot of the chances. I'm not South Africa, but what I'm saying, South African people, they're taking a lot of the chances.
The authorities have their hands full and they are stretched once the sun sets and the criminals emerge. Crime intelligence seems to be lacking and authorities have been caught on the back foot several times.
Our law enforcement agencies, we are calling on them to continue to working together. As I'm talking to you now, JMPD has close to 878 JMPD officers on the ground. The situation is a bit calm at the moment in the inner city.
People are fed up and are voicing their anger.
Anybody who got his own country, if you sell him on the street, what are you doing in South Africa? Go back to your country and sell in your country. Ha! Truth is truth. This is not xenophobia. We are not beating anyone.
The xenophobia sweeping the commercial capital may well have economic repercussions. There's a large contingent of foreign students living in and around Johannesburg.
As we have to go, there are more than 50,000 students in this country. If all of us we have to go out, who gonna go to their own university? You know, they're in their own country. Like seriously.
Tensions are running at fever pitch right now, and it's going to take one spark in any one of these hotspots in and around Johannesburg, and we could have a complete disaster on our hands. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in downtown Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has sent a special envoy to the country following those xenophobic attacks on Nigerians. Buhari has also summoned the South African High Commissioner to seek assurances of the safety of Nigerian citizens as well as their property.
We have to address the issue of compensation. There has to be accountability and there has to be responsibility for compensating all those Nigerians that have suffered loss. And we are going to absolutely push for that. We believe that the two security forces, South African and Nigerian, we can have an arrangement where there will be cooperation on the ground in South Africa to arrest such events and occurrences.
And now look at our corporate headlines for the day. The deregistration of South Africa's Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union has now been halted. In March, the Department of Labour issued a notice of intention to deregister the trade union due to non-compliance with its constitution. Now, it argued that it was not a genuine trade union. On Monday, the Registrar of Labour Relations officially reversed course to say the biggest union on the Platinum Belt would not be deregistered. And Aspen Pharmacare Holdings says its debt as of June 30th had fallen below $2.6 billion. The announcement sent shares in the South African drug maker up more than 9%. Now, the firm, which has a market value of $2.3 billion, built up debt as it shifted from being a mainly generics business in a few countries into a multinational with specialist therapies, including for thrombosis. And Kenya's central bank has approved KCB Group's acquisition of National Bank of Kenya. KCB is Kenya's biggest lender by assets. Now, lenders in the East African nation have turned to consolidation in order to boost profit growth, and that's after the government capped commercial interest rates in 2016. NBK was founded by the government in 1968, but is now listed on the Nairobi Stock Exchange. And Telkom Kenya has accused market leader Safaricom and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission of frustrating its merger plans with Airtel. In a rare public spat, the telco says Safaricom wants to delay the process that seeks to provide customers with more credible options. Now, Safaricom has asked the market regulator to look into its concerns before approving that merger. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a quick break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. Libya's Benghazi port is back in business following years of conflict. And Zimbabwe is looking for ways to avoid food shortages in the country.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how whole stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Well, let's head to Sudan, which is under a 3-year transitional period. The country needs about $8 billion in foreign aid over the next 2 years to cover its import bill and to rebuild its ravaged economy. Now, it also needs an additional $2 billion of foreign reserves deposits to save its currency. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy spoke to Adam El-Heriaki, the Director of Macroeconomic Policy Division at the United Nations Economic for Africa, about Sudan's economic transformation path.
The challenges are immense. Right now, Sudan has a very high inflation rate. And the currency, although stabilized a bit recently, slided significantly in recent years. Sudan also has a high internal deficit. Government spending is very high compared to revenue, and also suffers from external balance with imports exceeding exports.
What would you term as Sudan's strongest economic sectors, which, if really triggered with the right strategies, could really boost economic growth?
Sudan has gold in big quantities, and oil and other natural resources. Agriculture is one of them, livestock is one of them. So the potential is huge. Talking now about what can be done in the medium and long term, the government of Sudan has to have a vision and a plan for the country to make use of its resources in the medium and long term.
We currently have a transitional government led by Dr. Hamdok, who is a chief economist and also worked here at the UN Economic Commission for Africa. He has spoken about economic reforms in Sudan. How much can his government do within just a 3-year transitional period?
The quick fixes that the government can do is really to start immediately to manage the liquidity crisis in the country. And the liquidity crisis has to do with corruption and weak institutions and the domination of these institutions, including monetary institutions, by politicians of the past regime. And I think this could be quickly addressed by bringing in responsible management at all levels, and better management of foreign currencies and the financial sector, banking in particular. Also quick fixes, as I said before, include stopping leakage in taxes and customs revenue because of the unlimited exemptions that a lot of companies enjoy currently.
Speaking of international support, we know currently Sudan is in debt distress as well as suffering from sanctions, for example, from the United States.
We would like to see quick actions on this, because the lifting of the sanctions and re-engagement of Sudan in the international economic order and facilitation of transfers between banking relations between Sudan and the rest of the world is very important for the government to address the economic challenges the country faces. So this is an immediate task that the new government should have.
Well, let's move on to Libya now. Fighting amongst rival factions had brought commerce to a halt at the country's port of Benghazi. But 3 years after its reopening, the port is once again bustling. Now, officials say the plan is to raise enough money to fully restore and expand the hub of Libyan business. With the details, here's CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy.
From ruins to recovery. That's the reality of Libya's second biggest city. Businesses in Benghazi are back on their feet after years of violence. That success is now spreading from the land to sea, with commercial ships docking at the port of Benghazi.
In 2011, the revenue was 7 million, but now there are developments taking place since 2 months ago. I cannot tell you by how much exactly, but there is an increase. We are also ambitious and hoping that we will surpass the current numbers.
The Benghazi port reopened in 2017 in attempts to raise revenues for its restoration and expansion. In recent years, the port has been working to return to normalcy after being severely hit in the 2014 war. At the time, rival factions were battling for the control of Benghazi in a conflict that has left parts of the city still in ruins.
Infrastructure is zero or less than zero in the negatives. Yards are not paved and there's no lighting at night. All this is not present.
Despite suffering massive losses, today the Benghazi port is doing brisk business. Trucks loaded with cars, containers, motor oils and other goods are streaming in and out of the port. Since it reopened, the port has been receiving more than 400,000 tons of grains at 18 docks. That figure is twice what the port was receiving before the war. The Benghazi port at the moment does not export oil, but it's giving hope to many that someday all major Libyan sectors will thrive again. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN.
Now, Tunisia's housing price index went up nearly 10% in the second quarter of this year. At the same time, we saw apartment prices in the period also jump by about 13.5%. Now, according to its statistics, Tunisia attributes the latest growth in its real estate market to the rising demands in the North African economy. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi explaining.
The National Institute of Statistics, INS, announced that the house price index went up by 10% during the second quarter of 2019 compared to the same period in 2018.
The prices have increased, but the real estate sector is facing unprecedented difficulties. The cost of building a housing unit is much higher than it was a year ago due to a 20 to 30% increase in the tariffs of construction materials.
The growth of this index has decelerated in 2018 following a slowdown in the rise in house and apartment prices, with a relative stabilization of the rate of increase in land prices.
Regarding land prices, we've recorded an inflation of 8.2%, while the average price increase for the last 5 years was 7.3%. Owning an apartment or buying land to build a house is a right.
Analysts say the purchasing power of the Tunisian middle class has plunged in recent years. As a result, ordinary civil servants and employees in the private sector cannot afford to buy a housing unit or an apartment. Apartment prices jumped 13.5% in the second quarter of 2019 compared to the same period of 2018, while house prices rose 11%.
The government imposed a new value-added tax in the 2018 budget. The VAT increased from 1 to 13%. The middle class does not even dream of owning a house in Tunisia. It's too expensive for over 3 million citizens.
According to the Ministry of State Property and Land Affairs, the volume of land transactions declined by 10.3% in the second quarter of 2019 compared to the same period of 2018, due to the decrease in land transactions by 11.3%, houses by 9%, and apartments by 6.1%. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, Zimbabwe and the World Food Programme have, have completed an assessment of food security in the country. Zimbabwe is seeking to find ways of mitigating against a looming drought and alleviating a deepening poverty in the country. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya has more on that.
Widowed, unemployed, and with many hungry mouths to feed, Anna Mabara's situation is desperate.
Some days, I visit my neighbors when it's mealtime, and at least they will offer me some food. My grandchildren end up scavenging through rubbish to eat what's been thrown away.
She isn't the only one in need of assistance here.
I have 5 children, and including me and my wife. This is a family of 7, and we cannot afford to buy enough food to eat.
They can't wait for the government handouts, but want the food distributed fairly.
The government needs to rescue us and follow up to make sure everyone who needs food is getting it.
At least 2.2 million urban dwellers are in line for food aid as the impact of a severe drought and worsening economy bite. Donors estimate about $331 million is required to feed more than 7.5 million Zimbabweans, nearly half the population, between now and the next harvest. But some here feel parceling out food alone won't be enough to get them out of their dire straits.
We will continue wallowing in poverty unless the financial and economic situation is addressed. Unless prices stabilize, we will not be able to make ends meet. It's good government is helping us, but even if I'm given grain, I will still need money to mill it.
Government plans to begin urban food distribution later in September. Hopefully, that won't be too late for some here who are already face to face with hunger. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
While you're watching Global Business Africa, let's head into a quick break now. Still to come. The UK government loses its working majority as the debate to avoid crashing out of the EU continues. And companies in Cuba turn plastic waste into building materials.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And just about 5:30. Let's recap today's top headlines. South Sudan's government has deported 4 British nationals and 8 Kenyans who work for a private security firm. Their deportation comes a few days after South Sudan accused the firm of owing the country hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. And in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has condemned the ongoing wave of looting and violence targeting foreign nationals in the country. Now, other African governments have also issued warnings to their citizens over the violence, which has been linked to xenophobia. And the World Food Programme has halted the distribution of super cereal stocks across Uganda's refugee camps. The suspension comes just months after the body stopped a similar distribution of fortified cereal in the country over fears of food poisoning. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Well, British lawmakers are currently debating the next step for the UK's divorce from the EU. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says a bid by opposition lawmakers to block a no-deal Brexit will destroy negotiations held with the European Union over this summer. Now, since taking over the Premiership in July, Johnson has said the UK will leave the EU on October 31st with or without a deal.
But, Mr. Speaker, there is one step that would jeopardise all the progress that we have made in the G7 and around the capitals of Europe. And that is if this House were to decide that it was simply impossible for us to leave without a deal and to make that step illegal, to force us, that's what they want, to undermine our negotiation, to force us, that's what they want, to force us to beg for yet another pointless delay. If that happens, all the progress that we have been making will have been for nothing.
It's becoming increasingly clear that this reckless government only has one plan: to crash out of the EU without a deal. No deal, Mr. Speaker, will mean food shortages, reduced medical supplies and chaos at our ports. Not me saying that. The government's own leaked analysis says, and it warns of chaos all across the board. Today, we had expected a publication of the government's no-deal preparations. This government is hiding from scrutiny, hiding from the people, and trying to hide us from their true intentions. This isn't just a government in chaos, but a government of cowardice.
Well, let's find out what happened at what promised to be one of the most explosive weeks in Parliament in years. Richard Bestick now joins us in London. Now, Richard, great to have you on the show. It certainly looks like Boris Johnson has lost his working majority in Parliament. What's the latest on that showdown?
Well, it was a very ostentatious departure by Philip Lee, a member of Parliament for the ruling Conservatives for 9 years and a lifelong member of the Conservative Party, as just a matter of hours before this great Brexit showdown got underway. He ostentatiously crossed the chamber, crossed the floor of the House and joined the opposition benches. And that, as you say, loses Boris Johnson his majority in Parliament. He now has no working majority in Parliament. It's not just an indication of the harm that Brexit is doing to the fabric of British political life, but in the coming days that majority will be make it hard for Boris Johnson's government. The debate, as you say, the great Brexit showdown is underway. John Bercow, the Speaker of the House, has given the go-ahead. The crowd outside Parliament getting very emotional about the issue, and inside it'll be emotional too. Emotional and raucous. And in a few hours, we'll find out whether the alliance of opposition parties And around about 20 rebels from the ruling Conservatives have enough in the way of numbers to make it illegal for Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of just 5 weeks here in Britain, to crash out of the European Union. Whether they can stop him in his tracks and force him onto another path. Just hours to go before we find out that result.
Well, we know you're certainly watching that. But Richard, Johnson actually surprised everyone when he said that he would actually call early elections if legislators blocked the October 31st exit from the EU. What could that mean for his government and the opposition if he actually goes through with that?
Exactly, good point, Uche. And in fact, it's will leave. If they can make it illegal for Boris Johnson to leave the European Union on Halloween, October the 31st, the default departure date for Britain, if he can force the country out of the EU by that date without any trade agreements, and opposition benches can stop him, where does Boris Johnson go? And the reality is that he faces the prospect only of calling a general election. But do you know what? The atmosphere inside the British Parliament is so untrusting and toxic, the British MPs might attempt to stop that move as well. Boris Johnson will find other mechanisms to bring down his own government, remarkably. What a strange situation that would be. But that's where he has to go. He said he doesn't want a general election. The reality is that when that vote comes in just a couple of hours from now, it leaves Boris Johnson with little other option.
Well, Boris Johnson actually says that this plan to delay Brexit, it could destroy his negotiations with the EU. But has there been any progress in those negotiations so far? Has Johnson put forward any proposals yet?
Well, you heard in that snatch of Johnson in Parliament earlier talking about progress. The reality is, as far as noises coming out of Brussels, that officials there are quite bemused by the progress of which Boris Johnson talks. That they say that when he made his little mini tour of Europe, seeing Chancellor Angela Merkel in Germany and President Emmanuel Macron in Paris, they say, well, fine, if you think you've got an alternative to get around the problems facing us with Brexit, come up with them. And so far, Brussels is saying he hasn't come up with an alternative. So if you listen to Brussels, progress, well, limited. If you listen to Boris Johnson, it's huge.
All right. Well, the pound dropped to its lowest against the dollar, some say in about 35 years, of course, on this news. Give us a sense of the growing economic uncertainty that has been caused by all this political turmoil.
That's a good point, Uche, because it does show that Brexit isn't just a pantomime. It will impact on people's lives. The uncertainty impacting on the currency, as you say, down to its lowest point against the dollar in 35 years. Investment at a very low level. Car companies planning a route out of the country if they lose that free access to the European Union economy. There is uncertainty and concern in many quarters, particularly among many there in Parliament debating the issues of a no-deal Brexit, particularly concerned about the economic consequences of that. Okay.
All right. Well, many thanks, Richard, for that update. Of course, that's Richard Bestick joining us there in London. Well, let's turn our attention now to the ongoing trade war between China and the United States. Beijing has lodged a complaint against the U.S. with the World Trade Organization over American import duties. Now, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce says Washington's latest tariffs violate the consensus reached by the presidents of China and the U.S. at a meeting in late June. Meanwhile, the IMF has urged the U.S. and China to iron out their differences. Take a look.
So what do you and the IMF think about the impact of current U.S.-China trade tensions on global growth?
The view of the IMF is that no winner from this trade war. All the concerned parties should return to the tables that were based on the multilateral regimes, and these regimes is supported by rule-based and based on more transparent, open, and equitable manners, so that each of us can contribute it to the solutions on that basis.
And in other news, the Argentine peso lost more than 25% of its value in August. And that's after primary election results showed that the market-friendly government has little chance of staying in power. Now, the falling peso has pushed up food prices, and that's affected beef sales and consumption in the country. Take a look.
Argentinians love barbecue, and they can't live without meat. South American cowboys riding a horse on the plain in the daytime and sitting around a bonfire to enjoy prime steak was a special scene in the country.
Meat for us is very important, and it's very difficult for an Argentine to go a day without eating meat.
But Argentina's ailing economy and slumping peso are making cattle pasture owners and steak lovers unhappy. Cattle farmers used to make a living with large agriculture export, but now they choose to halt sales. Although less supply helped increase price, this also forced steak buyers to reduce other living expense or finding substitute.
The dollar more or less rose by 20%, with meat rising by 18%, but we can't raise prices for the customers by more than 10%, so that's when you notice an economic problem. If the customers comes along and sees you've raised the prices by 10%, what happens? Instead of filling the freezer as they did before, now they put less into the freezer and tries to find other options such as chicken, fish or vegetables.
And the issue with the devaluation we had there, speculations will continue and some will rise the prices more than others, as we're seeing right now. Others, in order to survive, will keep the prices, and let's hope they don't go up too much.
Argentina has been in recession since 2018 and is battling rising unemployment and one of the world's highest inflation rates, running at more than 55%. Last week, Argentina asked the International Monetary Fund to restructure its debt payments on a $56 billion bailout loan agreed last year. The IMF said it was studying the new measures taken by the Macri government. Guanxin, CGTN.
Well, shifting focus now, there are companies across the globe that recycle plastic waste into daily use materials such as furniture and fencing, amongst others. Well, joining this league is one Cuban cooperative that's looking to reduce the country's plastic pollution. CGTN's Louis Chirino explores the difference this eco-friendly group is making in Matanzas in Cuba.
Like other countries, Cuba is dealing with plastic pollution that has washed up on its beach shores and river basins. A group of industrious people in western Matanzas province, some 100 kilometers from Havana, is collecting and recycling plastic waste. One company, A3, produces plastic lumber from recycled plastic waste. Inside a cultural center on the Bay of Matanzas, employees are building a plastic wood platform. Jose Antonio Soto describes the group's work.
La cooperativa es un modo
The cooperative is a more advanced kind of society-oriented work. I say this because each one of us is aware of the impact of our work on society, the environment, and our own family.
Following collection and classification, all plastic pieces go to the milling machine, which has the capacity to grind more than 30 tons of plastic waste a month, then eventually shaped into plastic lumber. Using old Soviet machinery, employees assemble different pieces of plastic wood furniture and other products.
I work with plastic wood here, assembling walkways, pergolas, park benches, baskets, and other products requested by our clients.
This is recycled plastic wood, as it is known around the world, and it is used to make this furniture. However, its processing in Cuba has its own particularities.
Nosotros la peculiaridad que tiene nuestro producto es que hecho a partir de
What makes our products unique is that they are all made from plastic waste. Unlike other producers, we do not use raw materials.
Tourist centers like this one, managed by Maria de la Concepción Sánchez, use the new products.
We replace cement benches with these plastic wood ones because they are more functional and long-lasting, and at the same time promote environmental conservation.
A3 is hoping its environmental work will help reduce plastic pollution in the country. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Matanzas.
And now let's check in on how commodities performed today. We saw oil prices heading south, with Brent crude falling over 2% on the day. They were weighed down by the protracted US-China trade dispute that, of course, has dragged on the global economy, as well as rising OPEC and Russian oil output. Meanwhile, gold prices holding steady as uncertainties surrounding the US-China trade relations and Britain's departure from the EU offset some pressure from a stronger dollar today. Well, let's head into a quick break. Still to come. Egypt launches its first online platform to train its future female drivers.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, let's go to Egypt now, where a firm called Direcciona is the first online platform which is designed for each Egyptian girl to find her match with the nearest female driving instructors based on time and location. Now, the team consists of a number of female driving instructors who are ready to accept your requests via the platform. And Yasser Hakim met with the founder and CEO of this startup that's creating a buzz in Egypt.
The idea of the startup came to Nairouz Talat after witnessing low-quality service in driving schools in Egypt, but her pitch concentrated on women.
It was just an idea. The main goal from it was to change the stereotype that women are bad drivers, or that most of them are lacking the professionalism to be good drivers. So we started to find a tangible solution. We thought of launching a website which is connecting any girl or women who want to be on road professional and learn the skills of driving in a professional way, to connect her with the female driving instructors. based on her area and according to the time that is available to her.
The project took off and has turned profitable in its second year, with 20,000 classes achieved and revenue of around $50,000. She forecasts double that amount by the end of 2019. However, Nairuz says there are common challenges that prevent startups in Egypt from hitting new heights.
I can't deny that it's much more better than any years before. That there is a great support to entrepreneurs now. Still, we have issues in the finance. The funding is still limited in terms of the agencies or the institutions that is giving those funds. To find a sustainable team who is working on the environment of startups is another challenge.
Drixiona, or steering wheel in Arabic, is planning to expand outside Egypt's main cities.
We are looking forward to expand to other countries, to other African countries. We are looking forward to expand to other cities in Egypt. Maybe they have the same need like here. Also, we are looking forward to develop our technology. Now we are a website. We want to also launch our app.
Nairuz Talat has also turned to high-tech expertise to assist in its plans for growth.
Can you imagine the operation hassle of tracking hundreds or thousands and even millions after that of training classes going over the different cities, over the different government in Egypt, for instance, and potentially in Africa, and maybe in Middle East or other developing countries? How can a small team track and optimize the operation where they stand in a small co-working space or a small office?
The startup hires and develops well-trained tutors. It wants to provide good quality service and remain ahead in this competitive market.
The trainer has to have a special leadership and professional skills. Not anyone who can drive can teach. She has to have the patience and talent to teach and control the trainee. The trainee thinks she can just switch on the ignition and drive. No, she has to listen carefully to my instruction, and step by step she will become a good driver.
It's very good. I learned a lot here. Things only women with driving experience can teach me. As females, they understand my fears or concerns when driving. They also give me good driving tips that I was not aware of.
Drixiona is a prime example of how, with a simple idea and hard work, a woman can be a successful entrepreneur in startup scene in Africa.
It does it.
Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, before we go, here's a quick look at how Africa's currencies performed today. And Kenya's shilling easing against the dollar. Traders say that's due to increased dollar demand from merchandise importers as well as excess liquidity in its money markets. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand was firmer as investors reacted to better than expected GDP growth in the second quarter. We saw the local economy expanded about 3.1% in the second quarter of 2019 from a revised contraction of 3.1% in the previous quarter. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.